Thank you for joining Grounds to Listen, a podcast where we talk about leadership and bridging divides. This is Ian Solomon, Dean of the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy at the University of Virginia. My guest today is Tim Tassopoulos, a wonderful human being, a devoted husband, a beloved father, an inspiring leader, coach, and mentor. Tim is truly much more than his professional biography, but I'll share a little bit of that too. He began his career in 1977 as an hourly Chick-fil-A restaurant team member and worked his way up through various roles, including Director of Field Operations, Vice President of Operations, Executive Vice President of Operations, and ultimately President and Chief Operating Officer in 2016. Tim Tassopoulos is recently retired, though still active in his community and continuing to develop leaders. I've personally learned a lot from hearing him speak and watching his example. I am thrilled to welcome him as a guest today at the Batten School, and I look forward to our conversation. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Dean Solomon. It's just terrific to be here. And we have a very fond place in our heart as a family for Batten, and so it's great to spend time together.
Thank you for being here. Before we get into your career story and the tremendously impactful leadership lessons that I've heard you speak about in the past, I would love to better understand Tim Tassopoulos, the person, or even Tim Tassopoulos, the teenager.
Well, interestingly enough, especially as you think about some of the opportunities that I was very fortunate to have from a career standpoint, I don't think you would have bet on me as a teenager. I was the younger brother of a more accomplished athlete and student. I was very small for my age. Eyesight was bad, and I loved to play basketball. And I was the guy that was either the last person to make the team, whether 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, or the person to be cut before the team was formed. And even as a senior in high school, I actually made the varsity team as a senior. I was very excited. I clearly was the last person on the team because I was the guy that didn't play until the very end of the game when the fans were all like cheering my name, because that meant that we were actually going to be winning the game by a significant amount. And so I was happy to have made that team after all that effort. And then the football players came out after the end of the football season, and my coach called me in with one other fella and said, "You're now off the team." And so it was really difficult. But I think when I ended up starting to work for Chick-fil-A as a restaurant team member at the end of that year in school, I was open to other opportunities. I really had thought I was going to be a high school history teacher and basketball coach. And obviously turned out differently. But really,
Do you think you took something away from being the last one picked for the team, from being the short person on the team? How did those experiences perhaps shape your hunger, your ambition, your competitiveness, your perseverance? How do they affect you once you actually started work?
Well, I would actually say, and I think your insight's spot on, that because of that limited size, and I was not really very fast and couldn't jump well, but I loved the game and I worked tirelessly. And I think those lessons learned of hard work, even if the outcome didn't turn out to be what you wanted, I think it probably set me up for understanding what hard work was going to be about when I started at Chick-fil-A. And I was also fortunate I did combine it with the hard work I'd already put in cutting grass and cleaning gutters. That was what I did all through high school to make money. And when I came to Chick-fil-A, it was partly because I wanted a more consistent part-time job, because I was going to a small liberal arts college and our family was financially challenged. And I was fortunate to have financial aid and scholarships, but not enough to cover all the expense. And so that led me to, again, a more consistent part-time opportunity. And boy, I was so glad that it ended up being Chick-fil-A.
And when you took the job at Chick-fil-A, and I'd love it if there are any great stories about getting that job, but were you thinking that you were starting a career or just finding a part-time job to pay some bills?
The opposite of a career. So I actually went to the neighborhood shopping mall to apply, still wanting a consistent part-time job, to apply at a family-owned retail department store in Atlanta named Rich's Department Store. My mother had actually worked at Rich's years before. And I went to Rich's and interviewed. And when I walked away, they did not seem like they were very interested in me. And so I went down the mall to eat at my favorite place, to come up with a plan where else.
And Chick-fil-A was your favorite place?
And yes, Chick-fil-A was my favorite place.
And what was your favorite meal there?
Oh, it's the original sandwich, second to none. And I walked up to the counter, and there was a sign that said applications for employment accepted today. And so I remember looking at that sign and saying, you know what, I think I might need a backup to the department store job. And I asked if I could fill out an application, and it turned out that the incoming owner-operator or franchisee of that restaurant, it was the first day in that restaurant that he was receiving applications, and I was the first team member that he hired. And it turned out to be an incredible mentor-mentee relationship. He's still a dear, dear friend, almost 50 years later. And it turned out to not be what I expected my career to be. And I often tell people that Chick-fil-A is my 46-year backup gig. So it's been fun.
Was there a point at which you realized, oh, well, I guess I've been here a few years. Maybe I should start thinking about this more as a career?
It was actually not until graduate school. So I finished my undergrad at Oglethorpe University with a double major in history of political science. Still interested in history. Still interested in politics, actually, which I think may be part of why I get so attracted about what you do here. It was pretty evident to me that what I was really attracted to was the direct people interaction that a business like Chick-fil-A, a hospitality and service-oriented business, would be attractive to me, and decided to be interested in politics, but not involved in politics. And so the second year in graduate school, I connected with the folks at Chick-fil-A. I had not really broken a connection, but at Christmas of my second year, and asked for the opportunity to come on staff full time, which I did when I finished my MBA in May of 1983.
And is that still a path that people can follow, start part-time and then at some point move to full-time?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really important at Chick-fil-A is the passing on of the culture, especially the culture of hospitality and service. And interestingly enough, we have an incredibly rigorous operator selection process, our franchisees.
I've heard it's legendary.
Well, we get about 125,000 applicants a year for about 100 to 150 selections. So the joke is that it's harder to get in CFA than the CIA. I don't know if that's actually true, but anyway, the math's pretty overwhelming. All that to say, of those 100 or 150 that are selected, usually about 2/3 are former hourly restaurant team members. And so that's a real advantage.
So they've shown that they know the culture.
That's exactly
and embody the culture.
Yeah. And we know them well as a candidate. And so the other third come from varied backgrounds, but the 2/3 of that group typically will be hourly restaurant team members.
And the culture of the Chick-fil-A establishment in 1977 down the mall from Richie's,
yes,
versus the culture of the Chick-fil-A I might find here in Charlottesville, similar, evolved?
Very similar culturally, very different, obviously, operationally, because we were just in malls, limited menu items, now a lot more service options with a freestanding restaurant and a lot more menu items. And the biggest change is actually the fact that when I started working at Chick-fil-A, it was like a little known secret that there's this great little restaurant chain based in Atlanta that was in malls around the country, predominantly in the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. But people who knew Chick-fil-A felt like it was just, again, kind of a gem that they loved. And working there was the same thing. It was like, this is such a great place to work, but people wouldn't really know that much about that. Today, because Chick-fil-A is the third largest restaurant company in America in terms of total revenue, McDonald's is still first and Starbucks is second, but Chick-fil-A is third, not in number of locations, but in total revenue in the U.S. And so people know Chick-fil-A. It's on a lot of street corners. Chick-fil-A is known for its customer experience. And so that's a little different because you're working in a business and for a brand that people know about versus I'm doing work that I love, but it's really, again, not well known, which was true in 1977.
So that transition from predominantly malls then to more freestanding stores was something that I think you had a large hand in.
I did. It was an incredible opportunity. I was 24 years old and had been back in Atlanta finishing grad school and working as an area business consultant for Chick-fil-A, supporting franchisees for about 18 months. And the then president of Chick-fil-A, Jimmy Collins, and Dan Cathy, who is Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A's son, who was running operations, Dan and Jimmy asked me to come to Jimmy's office one December morning. I had no idea if I was getting demoted or promoted or what was going to be the purpose of the meeting. And as I sat on the couch and enjoyed the conversation with Jimmy and Dan, which, by the way, despite their positions, we were always on a first name basis, even with Truett. Very collegial environment. But again, I'm 24 years old, and they say, even though you know that we're all in malls across the country, the executive committee's decided we want to test a freestanding Chick-fil-A restaurant of some type. We don't know what we'll serve, the store design, location. Are we going to do it drive-through? We're going to have breakfast. All of those things were a blank sheet of paper. And they said, so this is a blank sheet of paper project, and you're in charge. And I was taken aback. I didn't actually share this with them, but I thought it was like, I don't know why you have any concept that I can do this. But they basically said, you get all the outside experts you can, work with internal experts, and come up with the project objectives and plan and build a team. And I'll never forget, at the end of that conversation, I was still pretty overwhelmed. Jimmy Collins, who was, again, the president of Chick-fil-A at that point, he stopped me at the door to his office and he said, two things to be very clear. One, this is a blank sheet of paper for you. You're in charge. And second, I'm going to move you to this little office between me and Truett Cathy so I can have access to you so that you can ask me questions. I'll ask you questions. He said, to summarize, he said, you're in charge, but I'm here to help. And so that was a very vivid example to me of a key leadership principle, high challenge and high support. And I felt that challenge, but I also felt that support. And I think that really set me off with the team on a path that ultimately ended up with the first store in about 14 months after that. And it did extremely well. And then, of course, now Chick-fil-A is dominated by freestanding locations. And
you've talked about that high challenge, high support, or this notion that the top leadership development experience is actually being given real responsibility.
That is correct. Unfortunately, I believe that leaders think that at times I've got to retain all my control and retain authority, and the more power I can hold on to, then I'm going to be a stronger leader. That's just not the case. In my view, the highest level of leadership is developing other leaders. And the best way to develop other leaders is to give them real responsibility.
As you have continued to develop as a professional, have you done something similar with young folks who've worked with you?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've actually made more of a mechanism is what I call commitments that we make to be really consistent in the business. But one of our mechanisms is that the broad executive committee of Chick-fil-A, the most senior leaders, each have 2 mentees a year. And we've been doing this now for a couple of decades. And so I've had 40 or 50 of our most senior leaders at Chick-fil-A that I personally mentored. And it'd be at least once a month with that person. It'd be a trip into the field, multi-day trip, visiting restaurants, other learning experiences, and then just total access. And those relationships, I do think they paid off developmentally for those mentees, but I also think the honor, the respect, the affirmation that there's focused attention by a senior leader on the development of a mentee, I think it just gave them not just affirmation, but even enthusiasm that I'm cared for in this business.
That's very powerful. And I know I've heard you describe yourself as a student of leadership. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like in these roles, it's a great chance to both be a student and also then pay it forward as a teacher.
Yes.
It is continually reflecting on what makes a quality?
Well, it does start with the fact I do want to honor those that have invested in me. I want to honor Gary Geddes. I want to honor Truett Cathy, and then so many others that have invested in me. Jimmy Collins, as we mentioned earlier, and Dan Cathy. The best way to honor them is to pay it forward and to invest in others. And I believe that investment will be significant if I've actually grown from the investment made in me. And so the best way to grow that investment of those that seen some opportunity that I could have to contribute, that commitment to learning. What does it mean to be a student of leadership? How can I get better as a leader? Being around other leaders that I respect, reading all that I can about leadership, spending time watching, listening, and taking that, try to not only apply it, but also to share it. It's just something that's, I think, healthy. I also think it's rewarding.
So let's talk about leadership generally, and
Sure.
and how you've developed your own definition of it, your approach to it.
Yeah.
And also who has inspired you thinking about leadership, both in the professional business context, but also more broadly in life and the world.
Sure. So one of the things that I feel very passionate about is I encourage folks, not just in Chick-fil-A, but outside Chick-fil-A, to be careful to not be distracted by what often in our culture and society describe as leadership. That leadership is not status, it's not title or position, it's not power or control. Those things all exist, but that is not a synonym for leadership. Leadership, in my view, and the definition that I apply, is that leadership is intentional influence. Intention, that there's purpose, that there's an orientation towards an objective, in our Greek tradition, the telos. And then it's for influence, but it's influence for good. And it's not about achievement, it's about contribution. It's not about, I'm the leader, serve me. It's actually, I want to be a leader that's called to serve. I've seen it role modeled in Truett Cathy and so many others in Chick-fil-A. I've also seen it role modeled in the community. It's compelling. People love to be part of organizations where they believe the leader cares not only for the objective, the goal, or the purpose, but they care about the people. And I'm motivated by that. I think a lot of other folks are too. And I've been very fortunate to be exposed to leaders in sports, for example. John Wooden, the legendary former coach, now passed away, the UCLA Bruins men's basketball team, Coach Mike Krzyzewski. Here at the University of Virginia, Coach Tony Bennett. In sports and in business, Mike Duke, former CEO of Walmart, or Steve Reineman, former CEO of Pepsi, Frank Blake, former CEO of Home Depot, and even leadership thinkers, Brene Brown, for example, in Texas, who is such a great thinker about how all of us are imperfect, but we leverage the gifts that we have, the gift of imperfection, so that we build together relationships, teams, and organizations that make a difference in the world. And so it's very, to me, it's very engaging to have that kind of view of leadership. Again, I do think it's rewarding. It's not easy because there's so many influences to try to pull us from that. And I would honestly say, I think a lot of this comes from my own faith experience. And it's a core part of my life. Faith is the most important thing in my life. My family is the second most important thing. And then the third is the contribution I might be able to make in business or in the community. And I do think that leadership and management, 30,000 foot ground level is what I would describe it. That when people ask about Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A is generally recognized as a leader in customer experience, but I talk about these higher order visions, what we call, for example, at Chick-fil-A, second mile service, where if someone asks you to go first mile, we want to go the second mile. And it could be grabbing an umbrella if it's raining to make sure that a mom or a dad with kids does not walk out in the rain in the parking lot, or that when someone says thank you at Chick-fil-A, that a Chick-fil-A team member says, my pleasure. That is a higher order, that second mile service. Yet you also need two pickles on every Chick-fil-A sandwich, 3 of
First mile.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You've got to get the first mile right, because if a sandwich has been forgotten from the order and an umbrella is provided, yes, there's the appreciation for the umbrella.
But they're going to come back in the rain to get the second sandwich.
That's exactly right. So it is the and.
So let's, so many more things I'd love to dive in terms of your leadership experience at Chick-fil-A, but I want to maybe thread some of this and take you back to when you thought maybe politics.
Sure.
And how you've thought about the policy issues that you've confronted in your time at Chick-fil-A, or even just looking as a citizen now. You know, to what extent is your leadership applied to helping people beyond the business,
right,
in communities, in your church, in neighborhoods where you spend time?
So there's no question in my mind that two things that would be vitally important to continue to keep at the center of our both policy and politics. The first is the premise of unity, and that focusing on what unifies us more than what divides us. I mean, I'll just say it. No great leader is a divider. The best leaders are uniters. Now, that uniting might be challenging, because it might be to challenge our very best selves versus our lowest state as an individual or a community. But unity is what fuels great organizations if you want to make sure they're built to last. And then the other is, again, it's the affirmation of the individual and ensuring that there's the opportunity for self-expression, for opportunity. It's just vitally important that people feel in any organization or community that they feel affirmed, that their uniqueness, their personhood matters. And so it's not unity at the loss of individuality. It's actually unity affirming individuality, and the individuality that actually fuels unity. And again, it's very reflective of the Marcus Buckingham definition of leadership and management. It's very reflective of Jim Collins. If you're familiar with the great leadership thinker, Jim Collins, Built to Last and Good to Great. When Jim Collins talked about level 5 leadership, and I think it's just as true for someone who's trying to create policy as it is somebody who's trying to sell a chicken sandwich, that a level 5 leader, it's a combination of personal humility and professional will. Professional will is about doing what's needed and right and best for the organization, not for the satisfaction of the leader, but what is best for this institution. But it's personal humility, and all the leaders that Jim Collins highlighted in his book, Good to Great, in that research project, their personal humility was contagious, and everybody knew it, that this is what's best for the whole, not what's best for me. And I think that's the premise that we need in all nonprofits and in churches and in politics and policy as well. I mean, the biggest challenge to leadership is the leader's own ego. Second to none. We all have to battle it, but that's the fundamental battle of the leader.
And yet there's a model of leadership, or a trope, or maybe it's a caricature of leadership that is about the bold, confident leader who never expresses any doubt, perhaps never even expresses humility.
Yeah.
That I think many people grow up with. Oh, you look like a leader.
Right.
Because you're giving an answer when perhaps you're better off asking a question.
Yeah. Most, again, sustainable organizations are not operated as the genius with 1,000 helpers, as Jim Collins would say, but actually a person whose focus is on organization building. I mean, I'll go back to sports for a minute. Great coaches that move from one school to the other, even in the midst of the current environment of transfer portal in college sports and NIL, they still have to build culture. They just might have to build that culture more quickly. And the best programs are focused by coaches on being institutions or programs, not just season by season, but what am I going to put in place that will be beneficial for this school, this team, this community in 3 years and 5 years and 7 years? And people can argue that doesn't ring true anymore. I think what you're going to find over the next few years is, even in the current environment, that is what's going to be sustainable.
So as we look towards the future, certainly in college athletics with NIL, it's a very challenging world, but arguably even in the food service business or in any sector of our economy, this is a time of change and turbulence, it seems.
Well, that's what now that I've retired, and when others ask me about my experience at Chick-fil-A, one of the things that I do try to share is simply this. Even in a wide open marketplace, some, like in college sports, might call it the wild, wild west these days. But my experience with Chick-fil-A is that principles apply regardless. And even as the context changes, those fundamental principles of what importance of leadership, betting on leadership, of acting as one, alignment in the organization, winning the heart, engaging the heart of members of the organization so they can do whatever service is called upon them to do. And then lastly, really focus on excelling at execution. It's that's a methodology that Chick-fil-A has researched and affirmed. I still see it in organizations that are very effective, and I think it still holds true. And it's, in my mind, what leadership's really all about.
That's really, I love hearing that. So we are here sitting in Garrett Hall, the main building for the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, a school that you know a little bit about, and I think you've actually paid some tuition to the school over the years, and supported us. As you think about our work to cultivate and to inspire and to create opportunities for people to develop leadership, are there suggestions you have for us or advice for our students who many times come because they want to serve a higher purpose, because they want to reduce suffering in the world, increase security and safety and prosperity in the world? What advice might you have as they think about their own leadership and their own role as public and private servants?
So without question, we are fans of Batten as a family. Our oldest son, Luke, he finished the college in 2018, but he was already working on his Master's of Public Policy at Batten, and so concluded that in 2019. And we, looking through Luke's eyes, we know how important Batten was to his experience at Virginia. And part of it was relationships, and the relationships that Luke built with friends that are still very close, even to this day. Relationship with faculty members like Professor Geltl. I mean, just incredible relationship. With the administration, with the dean, with the career and counseling office, that supportive environment, but that relationship base. But one of the things that does is it gives the person confidence to stretch, to challenge their own thinking, to challenge others' thinking, because it's not as if they're hanging by a thread and there's no support mechanism. It's like, I'm confident and I'm accepted, and I can actually be bold, to use your expression earlier, in vulnerability, that I don't have to show how much I know. This is about how much I can learn. And I believe Batten's experiences, I think the internship programs that are offered, all of those are very valuable to help an individual student who's thinking about public policy.
Thank you for sharing that and for your confidence in us. We continue to try to do this, and I think those relationships are really so key. Having a place that is small enough and intimate enough and close enough that people can build those trusted relationships, get mentorship. And yet we also want to grow. I know you had experience taking something that was smaller and helping it grow. And you once used a phrase to me about growing a small company.
That's right.
It was, and we've tried to grow a small school.
Right.
So grow is important, but also that intimacy. Any advice for growing, for maintaining that the small feel and the relationships while you're reaching scale to have a bigger impact?
Absolutely. So that expression that you highlighted, growing a small company, is actually from Dan Cathy of Chick-fil-A, and that's where I've learned it and how I've tried to apply it. And the premise of growing a small company is growth is key to the health of an organization. And whether it's growth in enrollment or growth in impact and influence or service to the community, growth in terms of research, that growth is important. People want to be part of healthy, growing organizations. But the small company or the small school is also vitally important. Again, it's very relationship oriented, and making sure there are mechanisms in place for relationships to be built between faculty and staff, between staff and students, faculty, students, student to student, to leverage those relationships in a positive, healthy way for people to feel, again, affirmed, appreciated, challenged, but that they also acknowledge we are going to work together to help make this the strongest institution possible. And it's hard for me to imagine, in terms of the initial vision for Batten, not being one of, at the end of the day, when someone has an experience with Batten, concludes their education, that they have not been oriented towards making a difference in society. And I think that's exactly what's happening based on all of our exposure. And we know your commitment to that, which is so important. And I think we need more Battens, to be honest.
Well, Tim, I admire your faith, I admire your leadership and your example and your humility. Thank you for spending some time on Grounds to Listen, where members of our community can at least get a taste of your experience and your reflections. But we know your work is not done, even though you've retired, and you continue to mentor and coach and provide services both in the faith community, the business community, and the civic world as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks. Honor to be with you.